Today we're going to do some studies from reference and we're going to be doing gun poses. What I'm trying to find is musculature, gesture, and just get the general form of the character holding the gun in a cool action pose. We're going to do multiple of these sketches and we're going to define the musculature therein with shading and a little bit of lighting. We're going to block out these basic shapes in line first. What I'm doing is trying to find the hard points. So I'm looking for the skeletal structure underneath. I'm looking for shoulder points, hip bones, any kind of basic anatomy that I've learned. The hard points of the knee where the bony surfaces are going to get close to the top of the skin. How does the muscle create form in thick to thin in a natural feeling way so that we understand that this is a human body, that it's moving in action? Maybe the hair gives us a little bit of a sense of direction or wind or something. And we can use these human bodies as elements that we can turn into a composition and then do a really cool study on top of. These are studies in themselves, right? I'm using reference to be able to understand what these poses are, what the camera angle is, how the human body is twisting and turning from certain angles. I'm looking for primarily the chest and hip torso area first, and then I'm building out from there. In most cases, I'm really conscious of drawing the human body so that we get a twist of the torso and we can kind of draw some boxes like some of the examples that I've got up here really quick. If you can figure out what these boxes are like and what the boxes of the human body are like so you can define the perspective, then you can find everything else. It should fall into place. Once you've got those line drawings, you can take it one step further by cleaning up those silhouettes and re-emphasizing them. In this case, I want to make these characters look like they're almost like clay or structural in a way that's like a Disney maquette or something. So I want to light them from one side and test my knowledge of lighting. With this test of a knowledge of lighting comes having to understand form in a way that, not a lot of people think about. If you're going to be making comics or doing illustrations yourself all the time, what you want to do is understand these basics of lighting, principles of the human body, so that you can make this up on the fly. So this is kind of a test for myself. One of the artists that you can look at who really had a strong knowledge of anatomy and lighting and being able to convey it in a storyboard or comic form is John WATKISS. John WATKISS has worked for everyone from Disney on Tarzan to comics, and he has his own beautiful illustrations that are some of my favorite. He's got these beautiful color pieces. In some of his books, he talks about being able to understand the human body and make it up out of your mind. Of course, you need to do a lot of figure drawing from life for this. In this case, these action poses specifically, I'm trying to get camera angles from reference. So what I'm laying in here is the basic value shadow side, trying to get a sense of light direction for each of these poses. Each pose is going to have its own light source, and each one is going to get a shadow side. I'm trying to do a slightly darker value for each individual maquette or sculpture, and I'm really trying to think about these as sculptures, not as drawings. I'm trying to think of them in 3 dimensions. This is something students can get caught up a lot in. Your work can start looking flat, and of course there's nothing wrong with that if that's the style you're going for. But in the case of these human body studies, I'm trying to understand form. So I'm trying to understand the 3-dimensional space. How do I cheat 3 dimensions in a 2D space? When I'm choosing my light direction, I really want it to convey a sense of drama. So you'll see me light from the back or the front a little bit. In this one case, I'm lighting from underneath. I'm trying to show the musculature and to define the hard points or the hard edges of each object. With these hard edges, what you want to be able to do is figure out what exactly is happening from your light source, what's in light and what's in shadow. I come back to this a lot in my YouTube videos because it's part of my artistic philosophy, I guess, that to have a clear image, you want to convey these 2 tones first. If you can do that, you'll have a clear image that your audience should understand instantaneously. So it doesn't matter if they're scrolling through Instagram or something, they'll see it and they'll understand the image right away. And if you can convey it in a way with some cinematography knowledge where you're now lighting in a way that feels unique or fresh or like it's part of a really strong film language. If you can understand lighting in that way, your images and illustrations will just have a lot more strength to them and read a lot better. Let's stop right here really quick. We've got our hard-edged shadows for all of these, and what's great about this is we can see the clear light direction, we can see the shadow side and the light side. Usually the shadow side is falling on corners of the body, so these are edges like forehead turns, cheek turns, rib cages. Anything that's a box that you can simplify to a box is kind of catching on that line, and we're getting our clear shadow side and light side. Now what we're going to do is move into the soft edges. In Richard SCHMID's book, he talks about edges and how they're one of the fundamental parts of image making. So here we want to be able to balance between hard edges and soft edges. In our case, we're going to use hard edges for cast shadows and soft edges for form turning shadows. So these are two different areas where we're going to be able to understand what's happening in a surface, right? Not just the human body, but any surface, just by a hard edge or a soft edge. You can see I'm selecting out each area, and so I'm controlling where I want my hard edges to be and then where I want my soft edges to be. And by defining those two things very specifically, you can start to get a clear sense of what's a bony section of the human body and what's a meaty, soft part of the human body. Now, I'm using a big round airbrush for these soft edges, but what I want to do is control them so that they're not just general soft shapes. I'm going to start with a large brush for a lot of the big, soft, round areas. Anything that's closer to a sphere, like a leg or a head, might get a soft turn. But at the same time, anywhere where we're starting to get to a bonier surface, like a knee or an elbow, we might get a softer, smaller amount of chamfer. We're getting less of a radius in the soft brush so that it's a nice, definitive way of describing the human body. So we've got definition in soft shadows, hard shadows, and then within that soft area, we want big soft areas and small soft areas. And so this is going to control our eye and control our brain so that we, as viewers, interpret what's going on with each of these maquettes individually and the structures within them. I'll put up some reference of some of the Disney maquettes that I've looked at in the past, and these are really influential for me because they really show how you want to turn form and the understanding of surfaces and how the human body is really just a bunch of shapes, abstract shapes that you can simplify and show in this way. I'm taking a second to define the guns in each of these, just making it a darker value to the rest of the maquette. Looking at these maquette references, we can see that there's occlusion shadows in there. So occlusion is basically where the darkest darks are. This is where light doesn't reach. It gives your shadow sides a little bit more of an extra pop, and so that way they can look and feel realistic. So we get areas of deeper shadow, darker definition, and so this helps us push the form just a little bit more, and it'll make your images look really three-dimensional. In my case, I'm defining all the shadow sides. You could also work with the light, but I think the shadow to start with is stronger, and then we can build the light literally on top of these shadow sides, which we're going to do in just a second. As I said, you need to have a good understanding of form, so having an understanding of basic shapes of how light is going to fall on a cone or a cylinder or a sphere is definitely part of having a strong sense of form in general. When I approach these, I'm trying to sculpt the form. So what areas need emphasis, not from an illustrative standpoint, but from a lighting standpoint. Because I'm using a singular light source, it makes it pretty simple to define if my light is above and to the right, my shadows are going to be below and to the left. These occlusion shadows are just areas that are turning away from the light so much that they just get really dark. So anywhere like an armpit or underneath a leg or somewhere where light just doesn't catch as much, you're going to have shadow taking over and showing more prominently in these areas. So now we understand the shape a lot more with the occlusion shadow. It becomes more defined. If we wanted to, we could stop right here and take a look at our image and show it to pretty much anyone, and hopefully they would be able to understand the surfaces going on for each of these little sketches. And again, with that sculptural approach, we want to emphasize all the dark edges first. Now we can move on to the light side. For the light side of these images, I want to use a color dodge layer to get a little bit more of a pop and glow to the light, and that way I can control it a little bit so it looks almost like a sheen or a gloss on top of this maquette. What I'm going to do is only on the light areas am I going to touch with light. So any of the shadow areas, I don't want my values to mix. I don't want a light value to breach into the dark shadow side, and I don't want a dark value to breach into the light. Since we've already defined our shadows, it should be pretty easy to stick to just the light sides and use just a little bit of a highlight to push and pull certain forms forward. And that way, as we push them forward, the darks are going to recede even more, and we should get a nice three-dimensional look to each of these maquettes. You can see that I'm stroking with the light side of the form, particularly on the legs or the chest areas where we're getting a little bit more of a stroke. And so this is just a square brush that I'm using to define a little bit more of an illustrative stroke. And then we can build on that and control again with a little bit of soft edge as well. If the shadow sides were everything facing away from the light, now we're doing our highlights. So these are areas that are extremely facing towards our light. So we're going to go through each maquette and find the light source once again. It should be pretty defined from our shadow, and this is a good test. If you can't find it, maybe you haven't defined your shadow side well enough, right? I'm going to take the light side of each of these, and I'm going to find the areas that are closest to and facing the light source. Kind of like if we had a flashlight shining at each one. That would be our goal, to pick up these highlights and pull them forward, let them stay where they are, but don't overdo it where the entire light side is just a bright, harsh edge. Again, I'd like to re-emphasize that you can break each of these shapes down, a shoulder, an arm, a leg, down to its most basic shape, and it's helpful to think about it in these abstractions and not as an arm or a leg itself. I'm approaching these purely as this is a shape. It happens to be shaped like a leg for you, but for me, in my mind, I'm trying to think of it as an inflated cylinder or a warped sphere or a bean shape, and how can I twist and turn these forms around it using lighting. After we've emphasized our highlights, helped pull out some overlaps with the lights, we can see certain arms or definitions between the maquettes that are overlapping. I want to emphasize just a little bit of light to push and pull those forms so that they're not obscured to the viewer. I want to make it very clear. Again, even though they're overlapping, I want to use a highlight to separate those two surfaces so we can see what forms are coming forward and what forms are pushing back. As we move into the last phase of this, I'm going to add in a background and also what I like to call just a little bit of FX, or almost like a visual effects on top of these images. So I'm adding gun blasts for certain guns that are going to look yellow and have a little bit of a glow to them. Again, I'm using screen layers or color dodge layers in that case. And for the background, we're going to do some action lines, a little bit of perspective maybe that introduces just a little bit of dynamics to this scene. And we can end on that. We've gone through all the steps. We've gone through a gesture sketch for each of these poses. We've taken away our reference, and after that we've blocked in our silhouettes cleanly. And on top of those silhouettes, we've added a average shadow side. So that average shadow side is just going to be a block in of flat directional light. Then we're going to add our occlusion shadows underneath that. And then on top of that, we have our highlights, and lastly our FX. And we can see the full image come together. It's kind of a fun experiment that I did for myself just to understand what is going on with the human body, see if I could challenge myself to do it from memory and understand some of these muscles that I've been studying on my off time. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I really enjoy being back. So hopefully I'll get to make more art tutorials and YouTube videos for you soon. Please check out my Instagram and other YouTube videos. Hopefully we'll have more in the future. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you guys want, you can hit the bell so you can get notifications every time I make a video. Thanks for drawing with me today. I'll see you in the next video.